name's Andy Hess. I manage the evangelism efforts at Epic Games, which is a new effort that goes hand in hand with our subscription program plan. Maybe you've heard about it. But we're just really excited to be here and just participate in this event. I was asked to do an introduction for Ken Rolston, and that was really exciting to me because I've followed his work closely over the years. I've played the heck out of Morrowind and Elder Scrolls. A little bit of Warhammer back in the day, but going even farther back, and I'm betraying my age, a lot of the tabletop strategy strategy board games that I grew up with, he had a hand. It was part of that community. And the lesson for me there, I think, is there are fundamentals of game design. Forget if it's running on a computer or an Xbox or on your tabletop, but there are certain fundamentals of storytelling and design that make the experience fun. And this man was just helped define that entire process, that discipline, that craft, if you will. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Ken Rolston.
I'm not a cheap date, I'm priced to move. That's the difference. Okay, game pitches. You now basically understand what the title is. This is me, internationally celebrated game designer. That's what I teach everybody to parrot like little animals when I introduce myself. Venerable, meaning old and dangerous. From the days of paper and pencil game, a game which you could not win and in which the great joy was to lose all the time and die and then be reborn as your clone. And then also Tales of the Arabian Nights, a board-telling, storytelling game. Then I did Morrowind and Oblivion and a number of other light single role-playing classics. And Amalur Reckoning for big, huge games. And that's my major claim to fame. And now I am, the most important thing there, visionary, evangelist, and mentor. And that will be part of the context of what I'll be talking about for game pitches. I was hired as a visionary, evangelist, and mentor. You want that job, I assure you, it's going to be very hard to get. It'll take a long time, but essentially it means I get to do a lot of teaching and selling, and also the visionary part, really hard to express, but basically it's the guys who get people to go into the wilderness without enough food and water and not mention to them that they might die. It's like crusades and pilgrimages and things like that, very glorious, and just don't forget, a lot of the time people don't come back. I'm from one of the 7 age of dudeness. I think I'm a righteous old dude at this point. I've been around in the game industry for about 30 years. I entered paper and pencil gaming in my 30s. I entered computer gaming in my 40s, so it's never too late to make a mistake on this scale. One thing I want to do is a caveat. I am two kinds of internationally celebrated game designer. Mostly I'm a narrative designer. I don't do the numbers and stuff like that. I can't do math. I can't tell you how long I've been married. Too complicated for me. And role-playing game designer, that means I design the games that are narrative in their core in every way, and also far too big for anybody here to even think about working in. Is there anybody here working in a role-playing game development program now? Okay, pardon me, the tiny number, because it's just impossible. It costs way too much money, but nonetheless, my knowledge will kind of communicate to you in some way, but your mileage may vary. Okay, the roadmap. I want you to understand that I am a responsible linear storyteller, so I'm going to give you a linear story to tell. The first act, essentially, is a 2-act nightmare. It's about game pitches and how, as a mentor, evangelist, and visionary, I was using game pitches as a way to incubate new projects and also new people and new design flavors at Turbine and Warner Brothers. And then the second half will be about what I discovered about what I didn't know when I started teaching. That's always very exciting. I made shit up. I was hired to do something that nobody had done before, and I made it up. And then I'll give you an idea of what it was like before I learned anything at the beginning of 18 months, and then I'll give you an idea of what happens when you actually find out what you're doing. Then I'll talk about a few models to give you some illustrating examples of the vast abstractions that I'll be talking about. And then I'm going to talk about something at the end called for closet dramas, because one of the problems is that I've told you that I'm a linear designer and reliable, but I'm also going to have landmarks scattered through here. And that's to remind you that I'm totally irresponsible. I will not tell a linear story, just like in Morrowind and Oblivion. You have a main quest, but I promise you that's not important. What's important is what you see off way in the distance, and that expresses the complexity of the package that the simplicity never does. The simplicity makes you feel confident that you know what you're going to do. You're going to get to the end of your path, probably not dead. That's not a visionary pilgrimage type thing. But the landmarks, again, that one is supposed to be off the edge of this line, is a reminder that it ends in tragedy sometimes. So part of my job is you're supposed to hear what I'm telling you, but you're also supposed to look at what I'm doing more than what I'm telling you, because I'm trying to give you, exteriorize some of my thought process and how I go about making my visionary efforts and my tragic mistakes, and how they kind of get integrated into growth and development. Okay, so what is a game pitch? This is a very good game pitch. A friend of mine tweeted, and a game pitch is basically a game idea, and you need game ideas in order to make games, but they have a very specific meaning in my industry. That is, fountains of money occur when you make a successful game pitch. And that's what most people think of game pitches are, and that's why I was hired there to come up with game pitches, because they wanted fountains of money. There's more to it than that. At a game design level, what a great pitch does is it tells you what you want to do. It expresses what relationship you want to have with your users in the very beginning. And if you're doing your homework, your game pitch will be just as useful as it was when you were selling it first to executives as it will be when it reaches your user. That continuity of vision is something we're going to be looking for. So let me tell you what I originally came up with. I've been doing game design for a very long time. So I thought this would be a perfect process for the incubation process at Turbine. We would call for pitches, and we would call not just from game designers, but from everyone, marketing, sales, QA. They would submit a premise, which we'll talk about later, and we would go through drafts and revision collectively, and then they would make a PowerPoint if they didn't suck at the premise. And then they would do a presentation, and I'll tell you that that presentation was aimed only at executives. And that we would make a review. We'd say which things are good, which things are bad, and then we would decide what we're going to begin to go into pre-production on. So that would be the whole process in theory. Make up some pitches, make sure they don't suck in one document, make sure they don't suck in a larger document, present that using those two documents, and then start to make games. That turned out not to be the way it was, but I'll explain in a few minutes. Okay, let's talk about, we're on the second step of our journey, the premise defined. By the way, these are pictures of frightened mentees being mentored by me, most of them live in fear. So a premise is like a film treatment. It's like a 2-page executive summary. Film treatment, meaning if you're going to make a film and you don't want to give a total screenplay to an executive because he won't read it anyway, you give him at least that treatment so he has a record of what he heard. And there were a couple examples that I had created in 1995. The very first computer game company I went to, I said, okay, where's the thing like a screenplay that I do in order to start the games? And they looked at me gap-jawed with indifference and confusion, because there was no, and still is no, accepted format to start a game in. So I just invented one on the spot 20 years ago, before I knew what I was doing. These are the things that I used just these last 2 or 3 years, because since nobody has a better shared format, I decided I would try that. I have 2 examples here. These were written in 1995. They have various structural units, which I'll go over in a little more detail. the titles and the imaginative entry are two elements of the way I get started, and what I really want to have happen is to have the title has to catch, and some fragment of imaginative entry. And this is what they would look like. They would start off with a title, and they would have a little snatch, a thing like a pull quote in a magazine, something that you'd find lying out in the margins. And then I give you a high concept, something you usually hear, you know, like, let's see, give me a name of a MOBA. League of Legends meets Harry met Sally, or whatever, something like that. So whatever it is, it's a high concept. No matter how inconceivable it is, that's the simple way you would start it. And then there's a section which says who you are and what you're doing, which, by the way, if you're game designers and you fuck this up, you don't remember that you have to do this. This is really, the notion is going to be that a pitch process creation is a great way to teach you how to be a non-sucking game designer. Not that you don't know how to do all these things, but you generally forget a checklist to make sure you did them all. And you may often be in a fervent state of creation where you've forgotten the other 3 or 4 or 5 things you need on your checklist. Also, your interface, roughly, what does it look like when you're playing it? That would also substitute in some case for a genre. Your gameplay, this would explain briefly in a paragraph or so what you were actually doing when you play, because you need to have gameplay when you're in a game. Mood, to me, because I'm an internationally celebrated narrative designer, it's always important to me to have those elements of narrative that I think are more emotional. So I wanted to know, that's what that does, that's really cool. The interface between you and your user is through the mood of the thing that you do, and you want to touch something in them. You want to know what emotion it is you're touching. And then I would talk, just because I'd be talking to people who had money, I want them to shower money on them, have to talk roughly about how big an audience I was and how I thought we would have some way to fund it. And back in 1995, there were some very simple ways to make money. There are different ways to make money now, but you would have to fill that in on your own. And then something that I didn't know about, this came in about the 12th month of our design process. We added another section called emulation target, which I'd have to say is the most important tool if you're going to talk to executives, because they don't want to know any of the details, see, because they're not developers in most cases. I've been lucky enough actually at Bestsoft and Big Huge, they were developers, the people I was working for. So when I was talking about something exciting in a design sense, they understood what I was talking about, they got the references. What executives are not going to be able to do is to make those connections. So if you could say, oh, it's just like Clash of Clans. Here's the good thing about that. That meant your designer actually had an idea of what the game looked like and felt like. Here's the bad side of that. If it's a game no one's ever seen before, you can't make that emulation target. So it does place constraints on what you can come up with, and we can discuss that in the broader sense later. This is a landmark. This is where we swerve off the road into the high grass occasionally, and it's because I think of game development as a clown car moving through tall, long grass. So far I've tried to express in some way how deliberate and intelligent it is. What it really is very, very creative people, very highly energized to go somewhere in a big hurry, and there's just no way to know where they're going. They're going to go very, very fast, and their accidents are very likely. So cheerfulness is really the most important feature of a game development. Okay, a PowerPoint. I didn't know what planking was, and I think that's what planking is, and I did that for. At any rate, PowerPoints are what the industry uses. The way you're going to find out something about PowerPoints is by looking at them. Guess what you can't do? You can't look at PowerPoints. Because once a company does one, that's an intellectual property they're going to guard. So we're going to talk a little bit about how we find ways to get around that problem. You're going to study the existing ones when you can find them. Me, I provide a starter template. It is so incredibly non-detailed. But I'll give you an example of that so you can get started. It's just that you ought to start off with some form, and then you can start making progress because you've checked off things on your checklist. You want to then share your models. If you have 12 people who've submitted pitches, they're going to learn more from each other than they'll ever learn from me. Partly, number one, because I'm a limited resource and I only know so much about game development and game design. Whereas if you look at, you steal from one another's materials in order to make your stuff better. You're always trying to compete and to win, because winning is everything, isn't that right? I didn't hear that blood-curdling cheer that I expected. But, and then you're going to steal one another's styles and tricks. And of course, you want art director love, but I will warn you, if you're a game designer and you don't have entry-level art skills, that doesn't mean making art, but stealing art and using it in graphic design. You need to be able to make maps. Please understand, if anything I have to say to game designers is learn how to do things that aren't purely about words, otherwise you're a dead man. Use Excel, use freehand, or what, good lord, CorelDRAW, or other primitive things that nobody will let you touch. And the odd thing is, I found, often in marketing, because they're used to PowerPoints, they wanted to start with a PowerPoint and not with a premise. I would let them start, but I would force them to make the text a thing, because what it is the checklist. They had to do the logical deconstruction of what they wanted to do. They only had lust, they didn't have understanding, and the only way I could prove to them they didn't have understanding is to say, you can't fill out a premise. That's just a warning to anybody who tries to do it. This is based on THQ's Iterative Mackerel, as you know, but I borrowed their THQ, the actual gate premise format that they gave us. There's only 7 slides, and one of the slides would have maybe 3 different slides built into it. So it was a total of 10 slides that would be your basic format. The simple thing is just, what the hell is it? And then comes the important part, why should I care? Actually, if you've got that part right, then I'm ready to start working on getting the polished details with you. And then who's it for? That's your audience, partly talking about who are your users and partly talking about where does the fountain of money come from. Your feature set, bullet points. Bullet points, those of you who love words, don't love paragraphs, should stop loving paragraphs, because one of the things that people don't like when they're executives, or in fact if they're engineers or anybody that's used to technical documents, they want to know what's important, and if they're confused about what that thing is, what it means, they'll ask you. So you want to build that document to elicit questions, not to answer them. Because if they answer the questions, they'll have lost the will to read, or to live, likewise. And then, depending on whether you're in a narrative game or in a non-narrative game, you have to have some sense of progression. So if you don't have a 3-act structure, you'll have an introduction, mid-game, and then elder game structure. Try to give some idea how the player progresses. And then you want to have pictures. And for me, by the way, if you've got an artist to do some concept drawing, that's fine, but I steal my concept art. I steal it from trailers, from movies, I steal it from magazines, I steal it from book covers, wherever I need it. So that's essentially all the simple slide template that they were given. And then we made a call for pitches, and the process began. This is another landmark. This was supposed to be a narrative jazz talk, and I chickened out. But what I was going to do is I was going to put a red ukulele here and never reference it until somewhere in the middle of the thing. And that was to be a physical representation of how something can be presented in the background. It becomes part of your narrative. You want to know what happens with that. It can be symbolic in some way. It'll be theatrical because everybody sees Jesus is red. It's saying something to me. It's got to be important. And it's all by itself. It's very distracting. And this is going to be an illustration of one aspect. My product creation pitch concept is I always design 400% of the content and then I throw away and archive 350%. This is one of the pieces that gets archived for development for a future thing. So number one, I've foreshadowed my future development. You'll have something if I come back, you'll want to know where's the ukulele, where's the red ukulele. But also that surviving 50%, you want to turn it into 100% awesome. By that point, you know the 50% that doesn't suck, and you want to make everything like that 50%. Moving back to our structure, we've gone to point 4. what we discovered when we were looking for wisdom and truth, and they were unanticipated lessons and benefits because ignorance has that virtue. When you start doing something in ignorance, you will eventually learn something, and it's always exciting. Sometimes blood producing. But when you're in the wilderness and starving to death, you learn very quickly. You focus on water, you focus on food, and not roasting. One of the great things that we did by accident, never imagined doing it, we were going to present to our executives. But then we said, hey, we've got these really cool PowerPoints. They're awesome. Why don't we gather everybody in the company in a room like this and have a Sundance Film Festival of pitches? It was great in a million ways because it wasn't just designers. It was people from all different crafts. Also, I'm in a multi-development team studio, so people from different projects came together, and then if you get them excited, they start talking at the end of it. So your first job, first thing that makes it awesome is you're talking to your friends, and you don't want to suck. Therefore, you make your PowerPoint really awesome. And also, when your friends look at you and say, wow, that doesn't suck. I could play that game. Or you say, oh, that's stupid. You couldn't possibly do that. Or, let me translate that. That's too visionary. We never do that. That's too innovative. That's a dead end. But it was great. That was the way we engaged designers and programmers and marketing weasels. Everybody wanted to get involved. So that public display of the studio mission at a top level, if you're managing companies or something like that, that is a really powerful morale thing. I hated and despised our studio executive because he kept talking about how good this would be for morale. And then later I had to say, oh yeah, you were so totally right. This is not just an artistic thing. This is about understanding what your people do, and it's giving people a chance to do something creative. How many people get a game made? Very few, but a lot of people got to give their idea and have it presented to people. That was totally awesome. We originally, this is at the technical level of what an idiot am I and how I learned. I originally thought we were just talking about two documents, because I love documents. I'm a narrative designer. I'm really a writer, no more than a writer. So I love documents, but that's not what it was. What it really is I had forgotten somehow that I used to believe when I was a kid, and what my students, when I was teaching high school, all believed that literature equaled the text. That the book that you read, Rebecca of Sunnybrook Farm, that had to be exactly written the way it was. The Game of Thrones books, they had to be that way. It never occurred to them that the author was making choices. So the important thing to realize, which I learned back in college from Louise Rosenblatt, is that literature is the sum of the text and the reader. It's the response of the reader that makes literature, and if you forget about that, you are a dead man. So I missed that when I was trying to put together your idea of game pitches. So my new evolved and enlightened concept is that it's about the premise and the PowerPoint, but the important thing about the premise and the PowerPoint is that they generated frequently asked questions. You would step in, you do a 5-minute presentation to an executive, and then the thing that we didn't know was important happened. The executives would ask questions, and then we would look at one another and say, holy shit, that's what everything was about, because the executive was telling you what he wanted to hear, not what you wanted to tell him. And that was the most important thing that you could possibly do. So all of our, we built into our process a dry runs where we did presentations for hostile audiences, that is trained hostile audiences. Your friends who are trained to be rudely and adorably mean to you. And that generated, oh, holy shit, if I don't have the answer to that question, this game sucks. Oh yeah, I need to know that. You make this list. And then what that does is it allows the presenter to go in, deliver for 5 minutes, and then wait patiently, like this. Like you're challenging the executive to ask a question. And he he asks a question, and if you answer it in such a way that you stuff it, man, he doesn't have the will to resist, and then he says, well, what about this other thing? And it's always a little more tentative, because if he doesn't score with the first question, he's going to go a little slightly. If you get through 3 questions, and every one of your answers reveals that you know what the hell you're doing, he no longer has, he has the moral and emotional will to resist. But at that point, you've at least gotten across the sill. Now, one thing I want to suggest about how this works is we discovered that there's a certain container capacity that PowerPoint should only contain 1% of what your project is about, and the executive capacity is only about 1% of what your total project is. And the new user capacity, this is the thing we didn't understand. They said, yeah, if I can't explain it to a user simply, then it's not a very good idea. It has to be in that one small footprint, 1%. And the trick is, the visionary genius has to be prepared for when questions are asked, to act as though he knows 450% of everything. And by the way, that means you have to set yourself to a very high standard of having done your homework. You do not peacock that in front of your audience when you present it. You don't try to show that you're extremely smart. You let them be smart. You show them something that's intriguing and let them demonstrate their intelligence, and then you stuff their intelligence right down their throats with power because you've done your homework. By the way, hand waving right now, how hard that is to do. Everything I do here is hand waving, how hard it is. But I'm just trying to give you a really simple idea that you can imagine. So what you really need to understand is that the presentation is just a way to get executive questions. Ideally, it's also a way to get user questions. When you present it to a whole studio, the questions you'll get will be different questions than you get from an executive. Very often they'll be user and developer directed and useful at that level. And then you want to reveal your depth of genius and project your project mastery. And then 3 great spontaneous answers, that's the goal you want to win. You want to have three strikes and move to the next level. So, in a more enlightened sense, what you should also realize is it should recapitulate the entire evolution of your project. You should begin worrying with your pitch that you craft together with your friends, and then you have to get past your execs, but you also have to get the buy-in of your studio colleagues, and then when your project team is coming together, you need to take that vision, and it has to be in a 1% tiny, understandable, and excitable form, and then finally that form has to move directly into the user. You want that continuity of vision. That's what vision stuff is about. And again, I'm hand-waving the whole problem, how difficult that is. I have a dream of one vision moving from pitch to user. I've never actually been able to do it. With Morrowind, I think I came as close. I had a 10-item thing that I planned to use early with publicity and journalists. And of the 10 things, 9 of them were sensible. The third thing was something like text management or journals. And anybody who played Morrowind will discover we made the worst journal in modern history and somehow forgot to care about that. So, even at my best effort, you should fail at anything like this. But it's a great high conception. Also, GDC 2014, fabulous presentation. Can't remember the guy's name, Greg something or other. Defining project vision. He tracks the Saints Row 1 through 4. Totally good reading for you. You may not be able to understand it without that. Hopefully we'll have the video someday, but right now you have the PowerPoint to look at. Here's some other things just quickly. It's great to have a learned community of intellectual disputation. It's nice to argue about game design ideas together. That brings you together. We found awesome people who were way outside of their game design comfort zones, who were awfully creative. Oddly enough, very often in marketing and in community, there are people who know the users. It turns out you often don't know the users. You know your tech, you know your game you like, but you don't really know what the people like who use it. This was a volunteer program. I can't tell you how important that was. These were people who would take time out, and over the weekend, they would put together pitches, and they would come in and peacock those pitches. They felt so good, and by the way, they have the moral high ground. They're not working for money, therefore you can kind of trust them in a meaningful way. There was a lot of innovation, and I want to tell you that that's not a good idea when you have executives involved. And it may be not a good idea when you have users involved, because people like what they're used to. And I'm not abusing executives in a solitary way. I'm abusing all of us. We want to see what we're familiar with. So what I've replaced that with as a political gesture, having studied how the Republican Party learns how to handle management, you can argue about innovation, but nobody can argue that whether they want freshness or not. They want it to be fresh. So you can use that word pretty regularly and have the moral high ground. By the way, I was so excited our people when we gave them that idea that they started making things that were innovative under the name of freshness. So we had to give them emulation targets to curb their creativity. Hand waving, one of the details that I'm not going to talk about is how broad a range of creativity and competence there were in these pitches. We mostly tried not to evaluate whether they were really great ideas or even makeable if they excited a user fantasy. Because my job when I came there was to represent the user. I'm supposed to say, I care about what people really want, not what's possible, not what we can afford, but what people really want, and then we'll find our way to get there. Oh yeah, learning how to make pitches is really great. Just recently we had a guy who brought me his first pitch 2 weeks ago, went through the dry run process, and by the time he ended, he went from a place where he was just like not at all good, and then when he stood in front of the executives, he just says, you know, I'm really scared, you know, and he was so at ease with that, and he was so winning that he charmed everybody in the room. He just went from 0 to 60 in 2 seconds, fabulous. Mentoring vector, for me, this is great. This is a great way for me to push my design agenda on the group as a whole. And through its opinion creators, the people who have the energy to go out and find things on their own, in any population you'll find out of the 100%, you may have 5% or 10% who are actually going to make change, who are going to make things done, who get excited about going into the wilderness without enough food and water, going on pilgrimages that aren't going to work out. So we were able to put together, we did a lot of research. I kept sharing the research with them. They shared research with me. They taught me stuff. And we shared those references in PowerPoints and emails. Now, what I'm not going to tell you about, what I'm hand waving, is how much it was a nightmare and a disappointment to a lot of humans. Number one, some people are perfectly, in the abstract, willing to imagine that they're winners and losers, but it hurts not to be a winner. And it hurts to be up at a Sundance Film Festival and not have the best thing. If you don't feel comfortable that you're in an entertainment industry, a performance industry, you're in the wrong industry. You have to love the suffering that comes from not being great until you get to be totally great. It's a very difficult thing to deal with, and I happen to feel that that's one of the positive things, learning to mediate that experience, but it's just painful for people involved, and you have to be an enlightened manager like me to help people through that kind of nightmare. And there's that loss of personal ownership. When you make a pitch, it's owned by Warner Brothers. You got to get over that, and I often told people before they gave them the pitch, I say, if you think this is something really awesome and you don't want to give it over to Warner Brothers, keep it. Work on it in your declining years. When you get fired or drift or go to prison, you have more time to work on it. Okay, so this is how we revised the process. We stuck number 4, dry runs and fact development in there, and then the brown bag presentations came after the executive presentations. So that's essentially what it was, and it's a big fragrant cloud of communal design and enlightenment. That was I wanted everybody to feel warm and fuzzy and educated, and also that's a reference to the cloud of unknowing, a work of, anonymous work of Christian Neoplaton, Platonic mysticism, and that's just because I want to show off because I went to college. Okay, and now we're going to move on to some ideas that I would like to share with you for ways to use the pitch process. Number one, game pitches for narrative jams. Why should we have game jams that are just about making great games? Let's have game jams that are about great game ideas. Something that you can probably work on if you don't have the technical skills. You'll still need a team in many cases to put this sort of thing together. I think it'd be totally awesome. I will say that making a great presentation is not easy, but making a great game is not easy. Those two things might be worthwhile. I want to tell anybody that's got a game development program in a university or a trade school or something like that, use this idea. Partly it has a small technical footprint and will allow people to get involved and to learn things before they have entry-level skills in the technical stuff. And it also teaches us a couple of important things. Presentation's important, and also making it emotionally affect an audience directly in a presentation. That's something you want to figure out how to do. How to put the hook into an audience. And then as shared references in the design community, I want to make a case for that being something that we ought to share and use as ways to stimulate new bad ideas. Okay, here's another one of those landmark things. I stole this from Gordon Walton from GDC talk a long time ago. And what I want to highlight is the most important thing there. Through the pitch process, the most important thing was being cheerful when things were going to hell in a handbasket, when you're working really hard. And I want to say that that's probably that plus boundless resources of energy is what's really important for a game designer. Because what you have to do is you have to fail, 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 and succeed. You have to be trying to do things that are too hard for you to do and do them over and over again until it's just fun. Okay, now we're going to talk a little bit about examples of this. There actually is one place on, by the way, I'm perfectly willing to share my two, the MEDAX and MAMA documents as references. Beer Over IP is actually on that website. That's Greg Kostikian did a humorous pitch of a way that you could deliver beer across internet protocol. But it's an example of an investor pitch. But where you really want to go is to gamepitches.com, which has a number of really interesting game pitches, professional ones. You're going to notice on that site, though, the most important thing is the difference between the pitch that was made and the game that was made. For example, the Bioshock pitch document, which is available there, looks nothing like the Bioshock game you played. It's interesting. It shows vision, but you're going to say, well, were these for the same game? Maybe not. This one is a little different. Planescape Planescape is like a 40-page document that captures the tone perfectly, tone and mood. It's probably my favorite example for, on paper, figuring out a very, very difficult game design and getting it A440 tuning fork perfect before you start to go into production. This is a game that almost certainly will never be made because my game premise was based on the idea that Satan decided, you know, he wanted to do something about the apocalypse, and there was poor staff work among the demons. They thought that the seals were not seals to books or anything like that, but they thought they were harbor seals. So they invented 7 giant seals who float on lambent columns of light that caused destruction. I just love that illustration. To me, yeah, if it had a little red on it, you know, just right. An example, this is from my private things. Before Kingdoms of Amalur was made, a game, Ascendant, was imagined. And I'll give you the first 4 or 5 slides of something that I used very early on to say this is roughly what the game would be like. The art is stolen from a first video trailer of Witcher. You'll see another piece of art like that from the Witcher thing in a few seconds. That's the only piece, that's one of the pieces of concept art in there. So you can tell they're kind of Nazi, so you know they're bad. So this is kind of an expression of what the conflict is. And now that's the package. You return, you pick up what your father left off, and he is remembered as a king, a hero, and a traitor. And the little thing there, it says, your dad was known by many names. How will you be remembered? So that was a way to set the emotional hook. I wanted to realize it was going to be about family, and it's also about people who are good, who make choices which seem good and which turn out really badly, like get your whole nation exterminated and lived in. And then you come back and you got a problem. Not your dad's screwed up totally. You're going to have to do something completely different. Your reputation at the beginning of the game will be bad, and it will have to ameliorate in some way as it persists. So that would be the end. Those are the first 5 slides, which I used to give a sense of what it was, and it evolved into a thing which I called the home pitch. We did 2 home pitches. We probably would have done more, and the home pitches were institutionalized as a way to communicate how we were making narrative progress. But I added a bunch of slides to it and used it for the first time to the whole company to give an idea of what kind of a vision we wanted for the game. So we used pieces of concept art to give you a sense of what the places were going to be. And this game was going to have a new concept. You would start in the west where the river is and conquer your way across the cities. And you would end up over at the choke point at the end. And the idea was that as you progress across the map, you could tell you were coming to a climax because the walls of the mountains of the valley you were in were closing in. So it was an attempt to exteriorize the dramatic structure into the landscape you were in. And just pictures of bad things. And weird people. These are people you can talk to before you kill. These are the bad people that you never talk to because they're really bad. And the cheap trick is you come back from across the sea out of exile, and we've assigned you 2 of the guards of your father's guard who are totally useless. And that kind of makes your situation even more pathetic and adorable, but they're good people, you know. They can at least tell you what they're your information conduits early in the narrative exposition. And then there's an idea of what places are going to look like, and then I made this in a 3D thing. This is my first 3D thing. I said, yeah, I thought that was awesome. And then my tradition is having 10 great features and always having less than 10, or more than 10, but never exactly having 10, because it was that sense it was going to evolve. If I have labeled it 10 great things and there you've been only 4, that's what we want. Okay, and then it would close off with this, and that would be their direction to go off and dig around in places where they would find out what the game was really about. This is trying to figure out a better way to do this in modern times than just messing with this. I would start off with this slide, and then I would put its context in a single slide. That could compress that whole idea the first 3 or 4 slides. So as a writer, you should always be thinking about ways that you could use compression, because time is money and focusing. Okay, it's an internal thing, turned it into a home pitch, funked as a primer. Later on, it was used to sell us to THQ. So there was mountains of money, but not those slides. The process of making pitches. We kept evolving the pitches, and the pitches developed over time. So expect to have that discipline in your development team if you want to not suck. Okay, another landmark. This is just the truth. I'm being sane. I'm talking to you sane. What's really important is for you to be crazy. If you are not crazy, you cannot get started as an artist. I don't know how you get crazy. Everybody's going to have their own way. Sometimes it's in the solitude of your own room. Sometimes it's talking to other people. Sometimes it's like holding forth in large crowds and showing pictures at them. But you need to have a picture like that somewhere in your folder structure that you can go back to remind you that you're not crazy enough to do work yet. Okay, now we're going to talk a little bit about closet dramas. The child within yearns to express itself. Me, even, I've gotten to do so many things. I have no reason to complain. You know, I've been so happy with the games that I've made in every way. But nonetheless, I'm not content. I want something more. St. Ken wants to trick some massive, multi-billion-dollar AAA RPG development studio into indulging my artistic impulses. Perfectly safe, and almost certainly disastrous and self-destructive crusade. This is not going to happen. It may have occurred to you that no company is going to find that an attractive pitch, but that's what this child inside is crying for. Frank Zappa, the present-day artist refuses to die. I feel that way. And what this is all about that I'm going to talk about, these are going to be some palimpsests or whatever the thing I'm looking for. People ask me, what is my dream game? And I'm ashamed that I can't answer that question. It never would occur to me to have a dream game. It's stupid in this industry where you know having a dream game, you need to have an infinite amount of money and everybody who is smart. And having all those people who are smart is even harder than the money because you need to know them all and you need to trick them into doing what you want. Going into the wilderness, no food and water, just remember how hard that is. Also, I discovered something called a closet drama. It's a drama that is written but never intended to be performed. And it might be never be performed because it would be too expensive to make the sets. But it also could be just because it's too dreary and soul-crushing for anybody to deliberately want to pay money to see. Another thing I was looking for is a concept of an architectural folly. And the thing in the Wikipedia thing that appealed to me, it has no purpose other than as an ornament, eccentric in design, and fakery. There's a high level of irony in my lust here. And also, nullus predicii, the Latin phrase for no commercial potential. I deliberately want to strain against the bonds of commercialism. And I love this little quote from the album. What freaks sound like when you turn them loose in a recording studio at 1 o'clock in the morning on $500 worth of rented percussion instruments. That sounds awesome. So this is going to be my presentation for you. This is no speech. This is just I don't want them to be able to win because they're dumb and stupid. That's what people are supposed to be. But I want them somehow at the end each to have their redeeming recognition that they're bad. And my ideal villain is an Othello-like villain who's got great style and who knows that he's screwed up. So that's my dream, you know? As you can see, this is not very promising for a commercial potential thing. But what I would like to do is to propose to you that we could do stuff like, this is a borrowing from a paper and pencil game. When you look on the character sheet, most Dungeons and Dragons games, it's where are my axes and potions. This has descriptions of your personality. You have numbers for your characters. And if, for example, like what Greg Stafford says, basically what it comes down to is what's wrong with these people in the King Arthur things? They've got a lot of ambition and poor impulse control. That's a perfect dramatic situation. And in both Game of Thrones and King Arthur, you have lots and lots of people on the same stage with terrible desire to do the right thing, and sometimes the wrong thing, but they want to do things, but they also have terrible, terrible judgment. And they always are screwing things up, and possibly, when I say terrible judgment, maybe it's the human condition. Maybe you can't but fail. But in that case, I think that's very dramatic. Passions are about what we do that we do not control, but which controls us. And this is just an example of the different kinds of outcomes that you could, if you had a stat-driven thing, and you really had a critical success with you test your lustful trait. Are you really lustful? And you see Guinevere and you say, awesome! Oh, that's the wife of my king. Oh, but I'll do anything for her. And anytime you say I'm going to do anything for a woman, you know that's going to generate drama. On the other hand, it'd be really cool if you were a female and you fumble and you say you're really suspicious of Guinevere. That might give you a power that nobody else in King Arthur's kingdom has. There's some other examples of ways that you can go about doing. Witcher gives you feedback before you make your choice, gives you some kind of idea, tells you when you've made an important choice and gives you some feedback on it. Also, Witcher 2, I think they do a lot of dramatic branching at death, which is awesome. The guy's either dead, and therefore doesn't have any downstream handling, or he's alive and he appears in a single episode, and all he does is he adds a convenience, like he holds the ladder for you when you go up someplace, or he takes an arrow or something in the knee. Walking Dead does another one. This fault branching stuff brought to the highest level of artistic elegance, and I'm not going to let you read that, forget it. But at the end of the day, I want to start off an HBO thing like this where you don't know. You don't know. Are they the good guys? Are they going to be the bad guys? I would love to tell that story where you start out, if you've got somebody you're sympathetic, don't kill them off in the first scene. Find a way to keep them alive. Totally not possible, practically speaking, but it is my job to get you and myself to keep struggling with that as best I can. By the way, this has been going on for a long time. Some of you may have noticed, but the Great Game Design Challenge series at GDC, I think it was, maybe it was Will Wright who had the Emily Dickinson license and did a game design based on that. And also worth looking at here, the Evil Game Design Challenge for Casual Connect is an attempt to figure out how to make Minecraft free to play. You should take a look at these if you're studying examples of game pitches. This is my closing exhortation to you. F is not for failure. F is for fun. Move forward. And I so love this. I stole this from a silent movie. It's so cute. Isn't this adorable? I'm going to climb the ladder of courage where there's no food and water. And this is the one thing, the only thing I can tell you that's true. The only rule in game development I can attest to, other than one other which I invented, was everything is always better when it's on fire. I don't think you can have opinions about truth. That those things are both obviously true. Okay, that's all I have to say. Now you can throw money.